Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on someone you've probably heard of, Nicolaus Copernicus. But we're not just going to talk about, planets and orbits and all that.
Yeah.
You're a philosopher, so we're going to look at him through that lens. We're going into the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Copernicus, and we're going to uncover what makes him so fascinating from that perspective.
Yeah. People tend to simplify him, but he was a complex guy. His life and work, there's a lot to think about there philosophically.
Okay, let's get into it. The entry says that Copernicus wasn't just an astronomer. He was a canon lawyer, a physician, and even an economist. He was like a true Renaissance man. Does this already strike you as philosophically interesting?
Absolutely. Think about it. He was involved in all these different areas, the church, medicine, economic systems. It really makes you wonder about how he saw the world. How did he reconcile all these different potentially conflicting areas of knowledge? Did they influence each other?
Yeah. It's like we talked about the other day. Can someone's different pursuits really be compartmentalized? Or do they kind of bleed into each other?
Exactly. For example, the entry mentions his work on currency reform, which was really influenced by the economic problems of his time. For a philosopher of science, this is interesting. How do social and political contexts shape how we think?
So we're already seeing that Copernicus wasn't just some isolated genius. His ideas came about at a certain time in a certain place, and he was dealing with real-world problems.
Exactly. And to understand the full impact of his work on astronomy, we have to understand what astronomy was like before Copernicus. Imagine a universe where Earth doesn't move and everything revolves around it. That was the main model. Geocentric. It came from Aristotle, and Ptolemy refined it.
Oh, yeah. I remember those diagrams with all the circles within circles. They had to invent all these complex things to make the planet's movements fit what they saw right.
You're thinking about epicycles and deference. They were added to explain why planets sometimes look like they're moving backwards. But there's one thing that bothered a lot of astronomers, including Copernicus. It was called the equant.
Equant? What is that?
It was a mathematical point, not like a physical object. They use it to explain why the planets don't seem to move at the same speed all the time. But the placement of this equant, well, it didn't fit with the idea that everything in the universe moves in perfect circles. That was like a basic belief back then.
So even back then, there was this tension between what they saw and their philosophical ideas. Copernicus was stepping into a system where the math and the worldview didn't quite match up.
Right. And you know what? A lot of people forget this, but not everybody in ancient Greece believed that the Earth was the center. There was Aristarchus of Samos. He had a heliocentric model centuries before Copernicus.
Wow, so the idea of a sun-centered universe wasn't totally new. Does that make Copernicus's work less revolutionary? Or does it just show us that science doesn't always move in a straight line?
That is a great question for a philosopher to think about. It tells us something about how scientific ideas are accepted or rejected over time. What makes an idea get rediscovered or reinterpreted in a new time?
And another thing, the entry talks about how Copernicus used the work of astronomers from the Islamic Golden Age. So we're seeing this exchange of ideas across cultures. And that's definitely relevant to philosophy as well.
Absolutely. It reminds us that building knowledge is a collaborative thing. It goes beyond borders and time.
This is getting really interesting. We're not just talking about Copernicus, the individual. We're talking about him within a bigger intellectual history. And that has implications for how we think about philosophy, too.
Right. And now let's look at how Copernicus himself got into heliocentrism. We can start with his early work, the Commentarios.
So we have Copernicus working in this system where the accepted model of the universe has some problems, at least philosophically. And then he writes the Commentarios, his first attempt at a sun-centered system. What was he trying to do? Was it just about getting better astronomical predictions? Or was there something deeper going on, something more philosophical?
That's a really good question. It gets to the core of what Copernicus was all about. Better predictions were part of it. But the Commentarial shows us someone who is searching for a system that is more harmonious, more elegant. Copernicus wasn't just bothered by the math of the equant. It bothered him philosophically because it didn't fit with this idea of perfect circular motion.
So he wanted a model that fit the data better? Yeah. But also one that fit with this idea of a beautiful and orderly universe.
Exactly. And this is what makes it so interesting from a philosophical point of view. Copernicus wasn't just rejecting the old model. He was engaging in a philosophical debate about the nature of the cosmos, about our place in it.
And to really get what he was thinking, we need to look at his most important work,
Hmm.
the De Revolutionibus. Now, this wasn't just a science book, right? The entry calls it a philosophical and scientific treatise.
Yeah. De Revolutionibus means on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. It's a really detailed and carefully structured work with 6 books. It lays out Copernicus's system step by step. And it goes way beyond just saying, hey, the Earth goes around the sun. It's a complete rethinking of how we understand the universe.
So he was creating a whole new way of seeing the universe. But he was also very careful about his observations, right? The entry says that his observations of the planets, which took decades, were respected even by people who disagreed with his conclusions.
That's right. Copernicus knew that a new philosophical framework had to be based on solid observations and math. The way he combined those two approaches is fascinating. He wasn't just sitting in a chair thinking, he was out there collecting data, carefully tracking how the planets moved.
It makes you think about how observation and theory relate to each other in science.
Mm.
Can we ever really separate what we see from our philosophical ideas?
Those are really good questions, and they're the kind of questions that Copernicus's work makes us ask. He makes us think about the connection between doing science and doing philosophy.
And speaking of philosophy, there's another thing about De Revolutionibus that I found interesting. It says that Copernicus didn't say his model was the absolute truth. He admitted it could just be a useful hypothesis. What do you make of that?
That's a key point. It shows how intellectually humble Copernicus was. He wasn't dogmatic. He knew that his model was a way to understand the data, a tool. But he wasn't saying he had found the ultimate truth about the universe.
It's really striking when you think about the time he was living in. It would have been easy for him to say this was a revelation, the final answer to all the mysteries.
Exactly. And for a philosopher, this raises some interesting questions about scientific knowledge. Is it always temporary? Are we always working with hypotheses, not absolute truths?
It definitely challenges this idea that science is all about finding certainty. And it reminds me of something we talk about a lot in philosophy, the limits of what we can know.
For sure. It seems like Copernicus, even with his revolutionary ideas, realized that there are limits. He was pushing the boundaries of knowledge, but he also knew there was always more to learn, more to question.
And that takes us to when De Revolutionibus was published, which, as the entry says, wasn't a simple story. We have to talk about Rheticus, the young mathematician. He was really important to getting the book published.
Rheticus is such an interesting character in all of this. Imagine having this amazing work that could change the world, and needing someone younger to encourage you to actually share it.
It makes you think about how important mentors and intellectual communities are for developing ideas. Even for a genius like Copernicus, having someone to talk to get support from, that seems like it was really important.
Absolutely. And their relationship also shows us something else, how powerful intellectual exchange can be, even when people disagree on other things. Rheticus was Protestant and Copernicus was Catholic.
This was during the Reformation, when religion was really dividing people. It's amazing to see them finding common ground in their pursuit of knowledge, even though they came from different religious backgrounds.
It's like a proof that intellectual curiosity is more powerful than ideology. It tells us that dialogue and collaboration are essential, even when we disagree about fundamental things.
Speaking of disagreeing, the publication of De Revolutionibus wasn't easy, was it? There's this whole thing about the preface written by someone else, trying to make Copernicus's claims seem less radical.
Oh yeah, the preface by Osiander. It's so fascinating. It brings up all these questions about what scientific truth is and how knowledge is spread around.
Okay, tell me more about this. What did Osiander actually do?
Well, he added this anonymous preface to the book. He claimed that Copernicus's heliocentric model was just a hypothetical mathematical tool, not a description of reality.
Wait, seriously. So someone basically snuck in a disclaimer saying, don't take this literally.
Pretty much. And you can imagine how Rheticus and others felt. They knew what Copernicus really thought. They saw this preface as undermining everything.
It seems kind of cowardly, doesn't it? To try to protect Copernicus from criticism by saying he wasn't being serious?
Yeah. There's a lot of debate about Osiander's motives. Some people think he was trying to keep the church from getting upset. Others think he was just trying to make the book easier to swallow for people who weren't ready for such a big change.
Either way, it's a really interesting example of how philosophical ideas can get mixed up with social and political stuff. It's not always a simple path from a great idea to everyone accepting it.
You got it. And for a philosopher, this whole episode is full of interesting questions. What does it mean for an idea to be true or real? Is it about consensus, about evidence, or something else entirely?
Those are big questions. And it seems like Copernicus, whether he meant to or not, Started a conversation that went far beyond just astronomy.
For sure. His work made people rethink our place in the universe, how we get knowledge, how we define truth, and how science and philosophy are connected.
Like he threw a philosophical bomb, and we're still feeling the effects today.
I like that. And speaking of effects, we should talk about how the world reacted to his ideas. Did everyone suddenly switch to a heliocentric view? Or was it a more gradual thing?
I'm guessing it wasn't as easy as everyone just accepting that the Earth wasn't the center.
You're right about that. People reacted to De Revolutionibus in all sorts of ways. It reflected all the different intellectual and cultural trends of the time.
So tell me about these reactions. Who was on board? Who pushed back? And why?
Well, it wasn't a simple story. People reacted in different ways. Like Erasmus Reinhold, this astronomer, he really liked how elegant Copernicus's math was, and he used his methods to calculate where the planets would be, but he didn't necessarily accept the whole idea that the sun was at the center.
So they were okay using his calculations, but not really ready to change their whole view of the universe. It's like they wanted to pick and choose what they liked.
That's a good way to put it. They saw that his calculations were useful, but they weren't comfortable giving up this idea that the Earth was at the center of everything.
It just shows how strong those old beliefs can be.
Yeah,
Even with new evidence, it can be really hard to change your mind about something so fundamental.
definitely. We see this in philosophy too. It takes time for new ideas to be accepted, especially when they challenge the way we think about the world.
So we have some people using Copernicus's ideas, but not fully accepting them, and others who are sticking to the old model. Was there anyone who really went all in on the heliocentric idea?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Some people saw how powerful and beautiful Copernicus's system was and they took it and ran with it, like Johannes Kepler. He used Copernicus's work as a base for his own laws of planetary motion.
Kepler, right. With the elliptical orbits and the sun's gravity, he definitely expanded on Copernicus's ideas.
Exactly. Kepler's work is a great example of how one revolutionary idea can lead to another. He took what Copernicus did, refined it, and opened up all these new possibilities for science and philosophy.
It's amazing how knowledge builds on itself, how each generation adds to this bigger conversation.
Totally. And then there's Galileo. His observations with the telescope backed up the heliocentric model, though it definitely caused some trouble.
Galileo, yeah. The classic example of science clashing with religious authority. It's interesting how Copernicus's work, even though he was cautious about it, led to so much change.
Ideas have power. Copernicus started something that completely changed how we see the universe and our place in it. And it wasn't just about science. It had a big impact on philosophy, too.
Okay, so let's talk about that impact. What does it mean philosophically to say that the Earth is not the center? How does this change how we see ourselves and the universe?
That's the big question, right? Copernicus, maybe without realizing it, started a philosophical revolution that is still going on today. The idea that we're not the center of everything challenged the whole idea that humans are the most important thing in the universe. That had been the dominant view in Western thought for so long.
It's like we were knocked off our pedestal. We're not the center of creation anymore. We're just one planet going around an average star, and the universe doesn't really care about us.
That's it. And that realization changes how we think about everything. It makes us ask, what is the meaning of life? What is truth? What is knowledge? How do we fit into this huge universe?
It's like Copernicus opened a box full of philosophical questions, and we're still trying to figure out the answers.
I love that analogy. And philosophers are still dealing with these questions today. They're looking at how the Copernican revolution changed how we think about ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, even aesthetics.
So Copernicus wasn't just about astronomy. His work started a revolution in both science and philosophy, and we're still feeling the effects of it today.
Definitely. And for a philosopher like you, I think the most important thing is to engage with those big questions that his work raises. Questions about the limits of our knowledge, the nature of truth, and what it means to be human in this vast and amazing universe.
It's a journey worth taking. So to our listener, I encourage you to keep learning about Copernicus and all the philosophical ideas that come with him.
And remember, like Copernicus showed us, pursuing knowledge is a journey. There are always new things to discover and new questions to ask.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Nicolaus Copernicus. We'll see you next time.